It took Laine a while to understand that the kids from the sea home were the troops who were fighting in the Cattle Raid of Cooley. She followed Fergus to the edge of a hillside and saw where many more tents were set up. They were mostly youth, children, like the sea home kids, the disparate youth of a generation, but they looked more like mighty warriors with their red war paint on. At least they would have been if they weren't still in their pajamas. She watched as they carried out their routines. It must have taken an hour at most for most of them to be fed, dressed, and assembled. As the youth mounted their horses and ascended up the hill, she remembered she was actually at the park in Boston doing her nails and drinking a Dunkin Donuts coffee, thinking of how the construction workers in their colorful helmets could be an army. Back at the sea home, Gwen always said they had to put on their helmets before riding, but Laine thought she meant riding bikes, not horses.
Stop the battle within your soul. You know it's all in your head. Being sad doesn't make you smart. It seems your heart just needs a fresh start. High, high, higher than the rain. Far from all the voices telling us we can.
How'd she get from being in Boston to Montana again in a matter of seconds? The places in her story could change whenever, like dreams do, and still make perfect sense. The only difference was in dreams she never got frustrated. But here sometimes she lost patience with herself as she grappled with all the concepts that seemed just above her reach. The more she let go of overthinking and just went with her intuition.
Close your eyes. Is it just you who's too proud to let go?
The less confused she seemed to be. Things are going to start moving pretty quickly, Fergus said, as she caught up with him. No more thinking and planning, Ryder. Now it's time for action. You mean I'm actually going to have to fight? Like combat-wise? Laine asked. Of course, that's probably what is entailed in being a warrior. That wasn't her way of being a warrior. She was more of an observer-type warrior. Could she be above it, taking a bird's eye view? And also be a part of everything? Maybe she could learn to be both observer and participant. She wanted to see what she could do with no one watching, when she was just living her dreams for herself alone. She was determined to go forward in life no matter who didn't support her. Plus, she had like 5,000 ancestors walking behind her, protecting her. She was their dream come true. Their blood and bones were her stories, their strife and struggle, her advantages. She was grateful to those who were not in her life anymore, her family who raised her. She loved them dearly. Sometimes she wanted to give up on her dreams just to go back home, but she knew this wouldn't be good for either of them. Probably the best way to help them was to be happy and independent. In her dreams, Laine tried to seek them out desperately, only to find that it was like trying to track down a long, hidden, but once favorite place that didn't exist anymore. It left her with a frantic, helpless feeling. She heard a story about how making a sacrifice for something was like giving an ounce of your own flesh. She had to stick to this choice she'd made to go after the life of her dreams, no matter how much it hurt. But on the other side, she was coming into a new, unavoidable phase where she was supposed to focus all her energy on herself and improving all the facets of her life. Even though it was hard, even though it meant giving up the people she loved, that was the only thing that kept her from being pulled apart internally, was to feel that she was doing something that might help someone. She hoped they'd meet again someday and want to know she was doing well in the meantime, and hopefully they were doing well too. She hoped they'd want to see her fly in her own time. In any case, she'd do her very best to remain humble and never forget where she came from. Her intuition led her forward, and she had hope that all the steps she was taking were leading her to somewhere good. Seemed like whatever was coming next, it was going to be spectacular. "This is a pretty good story. It's all coming together," Fergus said. "I'm starting to like it." "Me too," Laine said. "But you can't always be in your head. You're going to have to do a little fighting, don't you think?" Fergus said. "I mean, this is a battle going on. Put on your helmet." Laine realized it was next to her on the grass. She felt hot tears behind her eyes and didn't know what particularly was bothering her. She watched the blackbirds fly underneath the billowy clouds, like a carpet had been lifted. She wasn't one to quote the Bible, but there was a passage that said, "Though an army might encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this I will be confident." Although fear and anxiety might be right beside her, there was courage and confidence within her, and definitely the spirit of resilience. She'd certainly been through enough experiences, and what she might not have been ready for a year ago, she was ready now. "You ready?" Fergus asked, as if on cue. The trumpets were getting louder as the clatter of the 100 foot soldiers marched through the creek, heading towards them. They filtered up the crest of the hill, Alleel's troops mixed in with Maeve's, so that Laine couldn't tell the difference. On the descending hill, beyond the trees, Laine saw the hundreds of identical tents to Maeve and Fergus's. Laine didn't miss Mom at that moment because she was too focused on her intentions. "She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother," Dad used to sing, and then she went off to change the world. Laine thought that it must be really weird to give birth and raise something from infancy to maturity, whether that be a child or a creative project, and suddenly it doesn't belong to you anymore. It must feel as though it's never quite prepared or perfected for its independence. Still, after so long tending to, it is no longer one's own. It belongs to itself and the world. You have to let it go and be free and open to the world's interpretation, and sometimes cruelty. Must be tough, she thought. Like, what happened when she finished her writing, what she'd been working so long for? Would her life still have purpose? Would she be able to create anything else? Yet she couldn't abandon it halfway through for fear of it leaving her. She had to let it go and let it flow like a good mother. At the moment, she didn't miss the fireplace at Mom's because it was burning in her heart, and she knew she had what was equal to Mom's strength. Laine remembered what she created in her imagination when she was a child and Dad was supposed to take her to the carnival. She bit the skin off her lips in anticipation, but in the end he never got around to it. In fact, he didn't show up much. But some might think she turned out okay, despite that fact, and were perhaps relieved. In any case, she had to invent what could not be accessed with her mind. She was running towards the carnival now, because it was her time. She could take something of Mom and Dad with her into battle. She grabbed the helmet Fergus had laid at her feet. She peeled herself off the grass, and she stepped into the sidewalk. There were stones near this urban pond that resembled the Giant's Causeway, if the Giant's Causeway was bordered by a beer garden and 2 upscale cafes, supplanted by cranes lifting pieces of high-rise into the sky. As they came up the hill on horseback, the youth's helmets looked like the bright blue and red helmets of the construction workers. She thought she recognized some of the youth. She turned a step aside from an electric scooter. She realized she'd gone too far to simply go back to her apartment now. She had to be brave, so she tucked her hair inside the helmet and used Fergus's support as he lifted her onto a horse. Maeve was now on her horse, and Laine and Fergus were behind her alongside the fast approaching troops. Some of the youth rode close to Laine on the outskirts, moving inward. That's when Laine saw the girl behind the gate, far away in the distance, yet she seemed to be shining, and Laine could see her face. "Who's that?" Houston asked. "Evelyn," Rob said. "Who's Evelyn?" Houston asked. It had been almost 3 years since Laine had been Evelyn's youth counselor, before moving cross-country in the pursuit of her ambitions. It was hard to think that much time had passed. That's how Laine knew Evelyn the best, but probably not anymore. She'd be nearing 18, and probably be completely different than Laine remembered. "Oh, that's right," Rob said. "You haven't met her yet. She's a basic, typical white girl. Likes pumpkin spice lattes," Rob said, flipping his hair out of his eye. Rob ran cross-country and ate junk food. Laine didn't like the way the kids put each other down. Sometimes it was more fun-loving, but mostly not. Once Evelyn got so triggered, Laine had to take her to Dairy Queen in the middle of dinner to defuse a situation. While parked eating their ice creams in the van outside, they watched the cars on the highway ahead. "It never gets better, does it?" Evelyn asked. "It does," Laine said. "It just takes time." She might not have seemed that glamorous or cool at the time, but she had cared, and that's what mattered. A little voice in the back of her head said, "You tried to do something good. Now you're going to get to do something wonderful." What is it? Laine wondered. "Well, obviously not. Look at her now," Laine said, coming back to the conversation. It was like somehow Evelyn had gone from the awkward newbie on the squad to cheer captain. Now she was Fidelm the prophet maid, guarding the gates of Ulster. "What? That's Evelyn?" Houston asked. "Where?" "Up there where the horses are being pulled in opposite directions. The gates of Ulster." "Dude, she's hot now," Houston said. Thanks for watching my video, guys. I'll be back with another video next Wednesday. Until then, ciao!